The Houston Texans lose another star receiver to injury. The quarterback carousel continues to turn in Indy, and it's tough times for New York football fans. Hey, everyone, welcome to NFL This Week. Rob Wong, joined alongside by Paul Chapman. And Paul, we've talked a lot about star players going down to season-ending injuries the last couple of weeks, and you can add another to the list as Texans wideout Stefon Diggs suffered a torn ACL and is done for the year. The Texans still leading the AFC South, but what do you think this injury does to their chances to win the division?
Look, Diggs, a new addition for them, but he wasn't exactly lighting it on fire. Obviously, they moved on in Buffalo and almost addition and subtraction. They did better without him there. But he's a talented player, and he was a solid second option for them. Nico Collins injured, but he is coming back. I think that they will kick the tires. I mean, we're so in Canada, we're so conditioned to see trade deadlines mean a big thing because of hockey. The NFL traditionally hasn't done that, but it does seem to be heating up. We've seen several moves already for teams being aggressive and saying, no, I want a receiver. You look at, Carolina only basically taking a pick swap for a fifth and sixth swap with the Baltimore Ravens to bring in a proven guy in Deontay Johnson. Not a top-level guy, but those second-tier guys are available. So I would expect them to kick the tires on a number of guys. I know we're going to talk about the New York teams later, but there's a lot going on there, and there's a massive game on Thursday night between the Texans and Jets. The Davante Adams trade, which was one of the first dominoes to fall, probably made Mike Williams expendable in New York now, especially if they lose that game against the Texans. Williams is a guy they brought in. They've already got Garrett Wilson. As I mentioned, Davante Adams. They have a couple of other young pieces. This could be kind of not so much a showcase game, but if the Texans beat the Jets could be willing to dump, and he's one of the guys out there. Another name that you're seeing around a lot is Darius Slayton of the Giants. The Giants, I think, are going in a full rebuild mode. He's still putting up decent numbers, but I think both the New York teams are going to have to look at quarterback. So I think that makes some of their receivers expendable.
Yeah, really interesting with regards to some of the players on those teams. And like you said, we'll get to the Jets momentarily. But staying in the AFC South, the Indianapolis Colts are going back to 39-year-old Joe Flacco at quarterback. He, of course, was in there while Anthony Richardson was on the shelf. But since Richardson has returned, hasn't looked great in these two games. Do you think, though, this is a smart move for the long-term development of a guy in Richardson, who clearly the Colts spent a high draft pick on and are hoping for a bright future?
Not for the long term, no. Honestly, it's hard to guess what's really going on behind the scenes versus what they say publicly. We know Shane Steichen is a bit of an offensive mastermind, a guy who has a reputation getting the most out of quarterbacks. So, if they really are all in to win in the playoffs, this isn't a team like if you look at Flacco with the Ravens last year, you knew with that defense, just adequate play at quarterback could give them a chance. I don't really put Indianapolis in that category. And yes, the AFC is really, really mediocre in the middle. But if you look at that top end, is Joe Flacco with, there's some nice pieces on the Colts. They've got some decent receivers. Michael Pittman, who they signed to a big contract, is not having a good year. But they do have some pieces there. Of course, they got Jonathan Taylor, and then their defense is good, but it's not great. So does Joe Flacco put them over the top? I don't think so. And unless you've completely lost faith in Anthony Richardson, it's a bit of a puzzling move.
Yeah, it definitely is for a team that can't imagine wants Joe Flacco long term. So why not give your young guy a shot and get through, even if there are some hard times in the immediate future. Lastly, we touched on it. The New York football fans have had a rough go for a while now. The Jets haven't made the playoffs in over a decade and look unlikely to make it again this year. The Giants did, of course, make it a couple of years ago and still just once in the last 7 seasons. But here they are in the basement of the NFC East this year. So is there any hope for either of these New York teams on the horizon, in your opinion, Paul?
Well, look, I know we have a lot of Toronto viewers here, so they're probably cackling with glee, all the Jays fans, of what's going on. But I saw a great statistic on Monday. The Jets had lost on the weekend, but on Monday night, the Giants lost, the Knicks lost, the Rangers lost, the Yankees lost, and even their MLS team lost a playoff game against FC Cincinnati. It's never happened before that a market has had every team in there lose on the same day. I don't think so, and I think the problems stem from quarterback. When we talked about going all in, the Jets have done that. Their rosters got older. They've given up assets. it was Aaron Rodgers or nothing. So, they fired their coach and they haven't won since. They've looked worse every single game. So I think the Jets are going to be, they got some serious questions to ask themselves in the offseason, especially if they lose to Houston, which, as I said earlier, as bad as the AFC is, pretty much like all hope is gone, is lost then. The Giants, in the same situation. They've got a very good defense. They've got some great players on defense. They've added one of the best rookies in the league, Malik Neighbors, but their quarterback is terrible, and they signed him to a long-term contract. Yeah, it's not, we've seen contracts stretch up to the $55 million a year range, but Daniel Jones is still making $40 million a year. That's a tough contract to swallow. I think that they're going to have to move on from there. The draft, when you pay these big numbers, the draft is the only way you can dig out of that hole. And they've had some draft misses, a top 10 pick in Evan Neal that they will not play despite their beat up offensive line. They don't trust him to put him on the field. So I think you're looking at major rebuilds for both New York teams.